What's up, everybody? It's your favorite box cutter wielder's favorite nerd, and today we are looking at the diorama I built for the planet Nebulos for my Autobot headmasters. Now, once again, I've talked on here about not having cartoon backgrounds, and Nebulos is obviously not a real place, or maybe it is. Infinite universes, infinite possibilities, right? But the point is, even though it is a fictional place, it has a realistic look, right? It's caves and grass and gravel and dirt and oceans and blah, blah, blah. So it still fits the motif of kind of what I'm after for the most part. Now, as we move into that, once again, the idea was to have a couple layers, and then on top of that, the cave entry into the kind of headmaster cave. And if you want to know where to see the full tutorials of this and how-tos and etc., you have to sign up for Patreon. It is at the $5 level, and we do at least once a month. I've been doing multiple ones a month recently. So this video, once again, will not be a tutorial, but instead will be kind of an overview and thought process through it. So the one thing I wanted to do was really give the outer entry to the cave some texture. And I was just like, well, what if I just glued a whole bunch of bits to it, and then we kind of see how that works, or doesn't, depending on your point of view. This was kind of a straightforward diorama. Like it wasn't any tricks, it wasn't any like gimmicks, it wasn't any like challenges to really overcome. It was just a matter of painting. But I still try to always come up with challenges. So one of the challenges was to give an interesting texture to the cave, and the other challenge dealt far more with the background, and I wanted to sort of learn how to make it seem as though certain mountain ranges were further back than others. So it was just a learning process. I'm actually really happy with how that turned out. And the shelf, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I'll have the real live kind of thoughts at the end, like when we cut, it'll be how I really felt when we put it in, so that you can see how I felt in real time. But I was pretty happy, and I think that in hindsight, looking at it, there's a few things that I would change, but even now, the weakest thing about it is that I don't have the figures to put in it. So hopefully Make Toys will get back on the wagon and make that happen for me, but we'll see. This diorama, for being as simple as it was, it really took an awful lot of time because of the amount of paint it took, and the layering of paint, and the amount of time it required for the paint to dry. Far more than I would have ever suspected. I thought this was going to be like a couple-day project, and I was done. It ended up taking me almost a week just because I had to let the layers dry. There's another thing that I've learned in the process of all of this, and that is color palette. And I don't mean just of the diorama itself. So let me explain. When you have a shelf, like a bookshelf, and you're filling it with dioramas, as I've done, sometimes when you look back and you look at the whole thing, it's the same thing like with the shelf itself, where you're like, man, I don't have all the figures I want, and there's a better version of this figure out and a better version of that figure out. But the truth is that the whole, ends up outweighing the sum of its parts, right? Like we've been talking about here recently, where nobody looks at my Marvel Legends shelf like, hey man, there's a better version of Iron Man out there. Nobody does, because you just take the shelf in and you enjoy it. Well, the same sort of philosophy can be added to the entire bookshelf once the entire display is finished for one bookshelf. And an important part of that, which I wasn't necessarily aware of or thinking of, but only started noticing after the Star Wars ones were filling in, is the overall color palette of the entire bookshelf, which I hadn't necessarily before. And unfortunately, because of a lot of different things throughout the different experiences, or not experiences, but different trial and errors throughout the process. When you sit back and look at the shelf, you're like, oh, wow, that's an awful lot of gray, and that's an awful lot of brown, and it ends up kind of blending into one another. And then conversely, like, oh, wow, look at the red background to Snoke's throne room. It pops because we don't have a whole lot of red on these dioramas. So when I was thinking about choosing a location and having an homage to the cartoon that was also kind of, not super cartoony, this planet stuck out because of that, like the sky, that like the purple to pink sky. And it's like, okay, well, that's going to pop out on the shelf. And especially because it's a bottom shelf, which often gets lost in the sauce on a shelf. The striking kind of purples and pinks pop and end up drawing far more attention to it than I would have initially suspected. So, live and learn, trial and error, and luckily I got ahead of this one. I have another bottom shelf one, 2 more bottom shelf ones to do. I'm going to have a kind of come to God moment here shortly as to whether or not I should even bother doing some of the dioramas for figures that I only have like one figure for the shelf, or, like the Target Masters stick out kind of in my mind. Like, is this ever going to happen, or am I wasting an entire shelf space for this one Target Master? So as of right now, I'm still holding out hope, and there's no decision I had to make there sort of immediately. But once again, I think even through just looking at this sped up at 4 times the speed, that you can see the layers, right? Like I've done one mountain layer, I've done the sky layer, I'm now working on the kind of closest mountain layer, and then as soon as we get that done, from there we have to go to the actual entryway to the cave. So you know what I mean? It just took an awful lot of time between letting things dry, layering everything out, making sure everything looked clean, adding some fog and mist effects, and so on and so forth. And I will say that, like, I'm at a point now where the challenge is, like, I'm mining, like I've almost mined the cave too much, so to speak. Like I'm having a hard time figuring out like what to do next, like what location to do next. I still have one more in my head with no problem, but after that I'm like, I gotta maybe sit down and watch the cartoons again and try to get something that's not in a canyon or on some sort of generic orange or purple plated background, which is what I want to avoid personally. It's just not the look that I want, and I don't find it as rewarding. But these real world environments, they tend to work for me. They tend to be more in line with what I want and kind of create a better environment. So we're going to be transitioning here into my live kind of thoughts here shortly, and my reaction as far as putting it in for the first time. Big capitals, so to speak, there. Take care. And there it is. I think it works pretty well. The shape of the mountain is maybe a bit off. Like I maybe should have brought it out a bit more. But then I would have cut into the sky and stuff, and I think that stuff turned out really nice. And it's an alien planet, right? So I think I'm good. I'm not that I'm good at this, so I think I'm happy. I think I'm good with this. And populated. Yeah, nothing special, but I think it works. And maybe some room for some bonus figures on here. I don't know. If we get the other 2 headmasters, if we get that, I'll be good to go. But good grief. I think it turned out. I'm happy. Good for me, I guess.